Hello and welcome to the Quantum Bridge with myself, Casper, with my co-host as ever, Gary, who obviously in a different part of the country from me because he's just got a t-shirt on.
It is
anyway,
cold.
Hello, mate.
It's bright, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely freezing here. Obviously, a pretense of still being in summer. I won't go into all the other aspects around the heating up of things. We just haven't got time. Anyway, very pleased to say that we've got a brand new guest who we've wanted on for quite some time now. So really happy that that we've got this chance. And over to Gary to do the intros.
Thank you very much, mate. Yes, so I'll just quickly say, Sophie, welcome to the show. Hope you're doing well today.
I'm well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Good. I'll just usually a little brief intro of how we know you. So this is an interesting one because, like a lot of our guests, I was chatting to you on X, backwards and forwards, and then you actually watched some of the shows and left a comment on one of the videos. And I think from there, Casper looked at some of your work and said, "Oh, maybe we should ask this Sophie." And I said, "I know Sophie, sort of." Just as an introvert, it takes me ages to get to invite anybody on. So anybody who has to deal with me on X realizes I'm usually away with the fairies, and it might take me a while to get back to them. So, but we did eventually. That's why you're here today. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for the invite as well. It was really kind. And you're not an introvert at all. I thought your interactions are always immaculate, lovely.
Yeah, they might just be a few months apart, but yeah. Yes, so don't take offence, anybody. So, so today, I think, like I mentioned off camera, we have a lot of sort of viewers in America as well as the UK, but mostly it's quite weighted towards America. So welcome, everybody. So, Sophie, maybe you could just give us a little bit of brief background of where you've come in from, some of your history, and then we'll get on to maybe some more current events and where we are today. So,
brilliant, thank you. So anybody that may have seen me before, which is probably unlikely, but it may be from my story that I went public with last summer. So I was born in '86 with a rare birth condition, 1 in 400,000 people, called cloacal bladder exstrophy, and that's bladder and bowel on the outside of the body. There's more to it. As I reached the age of 22, I knew there was a lot of things wrong with me, but I went into the doctor's surgery and by accident on the computer screen, the locum had the notes of my case facing towards me. I was just in for something standard like tonsillitis, and I learned, completely hidden by the medical system and by my family, that I'd actually been born wholly male with a split penis. And the surgeons had decided that the best trajectory for my life was to, at 2 days old, remove the broken penis, remove the testicles, all sorts of crazy surgeries, and then raise me as female, and I should never find out. So that's the sad, negative, boo-hoo side of things, but there's a million positives to it. And I want to be positive about everything, because I think that's, how we feel, what we put out there is the experience that we get back in our life. And that's been proven over and over and over and over again to me so many times that I don't even need convincing anymore. That's just the way that I see the world. But after going public with my story, I got stuck in this sort of fear loop, the 3D news cycle. And just as I was starting to break out into understanding the post-truth, that there's something more, that hang on, all of these truths coming out are to show us that our reality isn't quite what we thought it would be. And then I start to explore what are we in? And I look into the organized religious side of things, which didn't really sit with me. And then I do start to believe that there's a higher God, a higher being of some sort. And I look into spirituality. And then I land myself resonating very, 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 very strongly with what Gary and Casper are doing. And I start following their thread, and I'm thinking, oh my God, what these guys are doing exactly reflects what's going on in my mind. I need to watch this stuff. And then we just got chatting, and then that's how I arrive here today, I guess. But I've been trying to do similar things on X to you guys. But I actually think that you guys are going about it in a much better way, because I knew I wanted to wake people up. So initially I started doing these small documentaries, or 30-minute documentary or interviews, you know, with people that might have something to say, that would make people understand the pitfalls within our reality, you know, the music system with Mark Devlin, or the spiritual stuff with Rachel Elnor. But then after doing 3 or 4 of them, I reached this conclusion that, hang on a minute, there's 2 parts to this. You wake people up, which is what, you know, the whole world is doing that at the moment, through the media cycle, through the alt media. There's thousands of people doing that. But then there's that trap that you wake up and then you realize that everything is terrible. And then it puts you in the fear and the low vibration. And then you ain't going nowhere from, like, you're stuck. And I know so many people stuck in that. So I paused doing that. But when I watch your content and what you're doing, I'm like, that is the way that all of this needs to go. Sorry, that was a really long answer, but just to say, like, I think what you guys are doing is absolutely mint. I can't stress it enough.
Thank you. And I really appreciate that, because that, you know, that intent comes through, because that's what we was watching a lot of, like you say, in the truther community. It was still very much that fear. You know, a lot of that was going around all the time, and we're like, we've got to move on from this. So, and of course, giving a platform to as many people as possible was the other thing. You know, just regular people, so we can all find out. Actually, see it on social media. It can be a little bit faceless at times, even if you do put your photo up, but sort of make people real. We can actually see that it's actually all around the world as well. So we try and have people from many different countries. Connections. Bridges is the word, isn't it, Caspar?
Yeah, funny that. Yeah, where would that come from? Yeah, I mean, just a quick one. So, by the way, well done for going through that's your life in a potted way so quickly, and so, you know, in such a concise manner, that, because it's not easy. I appreciate you've done this now more than once, but it's still, you know, I'm still sort of reeling. I want to ask questions, but I'm sort of reeling from what you've been through. But as you rightly point out, a lot of what our intention, I suppose, is here, Sophie, and it's kind that you've picked up on this and engaged with the material. You know, I know there's a few people out there actually watching at least. That's good. But it's this thing of almost anybody that comes on, even if they come on and they are in a fairly positive space, you realize that you can go off on a tangent that is sort of quote unquote low vibe, and talk about how we got to this point, you know, all the things we're facing and whatever. And I think we've sort of come to the point now where we all know enough of that. We can watch all of that anywhere. And there are sort of these 3 worlds almost, not just 2 now. So there's the old sort of legacy media stuff, and people still trapped in that. And I say trapped, but, you know, that's their journey, and their timeline will be their timeline, and it's fine. Then there's sort of those that are sort of quote unquote waking up, but waking up to hell. So, you know, that thing of waking up to hell isn't the most palatable of scenarios. And then it's like, well, you know, what are you doing? You're waking us up to tell us we're trapped. And it's that thing of, well, yeah, I can understand why you might want to keep in your coma or your slumber, because why wake somebody up to tell them it's all doom and gloom, it's all awful, and it's actually worse than you could ever imagine? So our thing is all about, right, there is a post those 2 states, other state, which is far beyond and far more expansive. And again, we're not claiming that we're the only guys who have recognized that by any means. But what we do realize is that the sort of people that we're getting on and the sort of conversations we're having are sort of sidestepping both of those 2 states and bringing up a conversation that sits completely outside of it, where everything becomes possible, and this much grander vision of what is life even sort of starts to happen and appear out of that. So I sort of get the sense that you're touching on that and are resonating with some of that. And I'm just really pleased that there are people out there, particularly yourself, actually, because I love the material you've done. I've watched and engaged with some of your interviews, which I think are incredible. They're really good, and I'll urge people, we'll put the details in, and I'll urge people to go and look at those for themselves. But thank you for understanding where we're headed.
Thank you. It's amazing to watch people arrive at this place, and the hope that I want to give to people. And I know you guys will resonate with this, because we've had little side discussions about it on and off. But once you reach that, once you get out that fear loop and you arrive in that sort of post-truth exploratory mission of, well, what are we in then? And what we're in is probably infinite as souls. And what I would say is it's at that point in my journey that I realized that, hang on a minute, I'm not alone. Because once you get out of the fear loop, and I guess with my journey, I'd also worked to resolve the trauma that was lowering my frequency and holding me back. So I was going back to almost like a 0 point of like, well, if I can resolve everything before childhood, I'm back to almost like straight from the source energy.
Yeah.
When that happened, that's when I started getting like what I would call spiritual guidance, experiences, things that I would have laughed about a year ago, and I would said to somebody, oh yeah, well done, thinking they're a bit insane, and all those things start happening to me. But that takes away the fear, because if you just allow yourself to flow, you realize that you don't really have to make many decisions anymore, because when you're struggling with a decision, you're shown a sign to guide you. So it's almost like everyone thinks we're off the rails, but we're firmly put right back on the rails, and we've got a whole spiritual guidance team that is helping us on the roller coaster. So overall, we're actually in a better state than where we were when we started. You just have to get through the thick of that fear, and forgiveness and trauma and all that kind of stuff to get there.
Yeah, I just think that these are just stages. When you look back on these from these sort of this higher perspective, so to speak, I'm not making that as a judgment or saying that I or any of us are at this incredible level all the time, but certainly just allowing yourself to look back and think, what about if this was just a process? Just like any other, whatever your views might be on evolution, but let's use the word just for the sake of it, that there is an evolution of a soul, so to speak, or of consciousness and awareness. And that actually these are just aspects of that. And these are lessons that you sort of go through and need to learn, simply because they allow you to navigate in a much broader experience at some point. You'll look back and say, no, look, I've had all of those lower dimensional and negative things. And occasionally, there might be decisions to be made or possibilities that present themselves, and without having what felt at the time like an eternity and it's awful and all of these other things, actually in hindsight becomes just another sort of guidance system.
I absolutely agree with you wholeheartedly. I couldn't agree any more on that. I think it's we're just navigating timelines and keeping our frequency as high as we can to try and get the higher view.
Yeah.
Was this obviously you had that sort of moment when you was 22 in the doctor's surgery, and then did you have this other moment like in 2020? Was that another sort of, when was your sort of awakening, if you like, to this sort of higher perspective?
So if we look at sort of pandemic times, I wasn't awake at all. I was deeply trapped in the system. I had a business that was serving digital services to government departments, so you probably couldn't get much more entrenched in the system. The vaccination periods come round, and my dad had woken up in a 3D way, had woken up, and he told me not to get the vaccine, and I kind of believed him, so went along with that. And then obviously as time plays out, I started to see that he was right about that. And then there was a few things that I don't want to get myself into too much trouble, but there was a few things working within government at that time that I started to see as glaring red flags, that there were a bunch of absolute liars and they don't have the best interest of the public, specifically around the coronavirus inquiry. So at that point, I sort of woke up. But as I was waking up to the 3D, I'd never battled the demons about how I was born, and I'd never spoken to anyone apart from the close family about it. It had, from 22 to that period of time where I would have been maybe 35, it had just been this boxed up piece of trauma on a shelf to be addressed later. But as we know, with this spiritual journey, I think we chose these big traumatic journeys in order to get to the learnings. And I think spirit or a higher God or whatever it is up there decided, well, it's all right, you've had the difficult experience, but you've shelved the bit that's going to give you the value. So I became really sick. I had sepsis, and it was all to do with this fake vagina that they'd put in at birth that a male baby shouldn't have had, blah blah blah. And this is the sad bit. Yep, I was sick and I had sepsis, but I got better. But as I got better, something within me, it wasn't like a conscious choice, it was something within me, is like, you have to tell your story. That is the way to sort this out. So I told the story, and it was as I was going through that journey, the first time that I would say I became awoken to this something more element was, so I'd done an easy piece of, well, I would say an easy piece of news, which was the journalist came round from the Telegraph magazine. We sat in my mum's conservatory. We had a nice little conversation, and then it goes in the Telegraph magazine. So there wasn't a lot of like input with me apart from a journalist that I really trusted. And despite my hate for mainstream media, I do still trust her to this day. She's a good person. But then I get invited on the Times radio, and I knew nothing about the Times radio because I just never listened to it, and I didn't know it was anything major. So, and I didn't even know there were video in it. So I turned up basically in God, I just summer clothes. I was sweating from walking all through Southwark. I was just an absolute mess. And I rock up and like, oh yeah, it's going to be filmed. And it's this big media building. I can't remember what it was called, but it was intimidating. And I got in there and I'm in the waiting room with this glass of water and my hand's shaking because I'd never done anything public before. And I thought, what am I going to do here? Right. So I thought this is going to be a flop. This is going to be awful. Now, this is the sort of moment, the light bulb moment. I went into the studio, sits down, and there isn't a word in my brain or a word in my mouth. And then I walked out 20 minutes later and I had absolutely no recollection of what I said, what I did, how I answered. And I could just feel this energy just running through my entire body like electricity. And I came out and everyone was really nice, patting me on the back. Oh, you aced it, you aced it. And then I watched it back and luckily, fingers crossed, that video did, it did very well. I guess for me, I'm not really bothered about whether it did well for a mainstream media outlet, but it did well for the messages that in my mind I'd hoped to get across. And at that point, I started to think, well, maybe I am being guided because I couldn't have said that. I couldn't have got those arguments right. If I'd have sat for 3 weeks preparing for an interview, I couldn't have done that. So something took over. And then as I went through the series of interviews, so there was GB News later on, and then I did something with Iconic that was like a face-to-face video thing. Every single time I did it, I had this feeling. And again, I came off from Iconic and Jamie Ike held my hand and he said, oh my God, you're literally shaking. And ever since then, it's just all awoken. It's like I'm starting to get information when I need things. I start to see if I'm mulling over a problem and I sort of subconsciously ask for guidance, ask for help, it'll come in the strangest of places. Things that go missing in your house, or a number plate that just goes by with an angel number on it, or 3 letters that mean something like a name. And I'm starting to explore the world like it's just this beautiful place that's just full of clues that they're hoping you find to progress you to the next level. Now, that's either I've gone insane or I've tuned into something that is helping me. But in my hopeful manner, I'm going for the latter.
I mean, I love this sort of phrase of the world isn't sort of stranger than we think. The world is sort of stranger than we can imagine or think. And as your vibration raises, for want of a better phrase, right? Because I don't want, the moment you say things like that, you are losing people inevitably.
But it's true.
As things sort of shift in your experience, let's maybe say a bit more like that, and you become at least given openness to there perhaps being more than you'd previously encountered, believed in, or allowed. These things of, because I agree with you, I have to sometimes stop myself and think, the journey that I've been on, maybe in the last even 20 years, is sort of very different to the pocket that I inhabited, not in childhood, because childhood, you do have this broader awareness and openness. Then you sort of, the programming has really kicked in and you're sort of, I don't know, let's say 18 to 25, you're sort of trying to be normal in some respects. You might still be rebelling in a way, but actually you're sort of trying to fit in perhaps. And then it's this thing of sort of unraveling all of that programming and saying, that's not the world. That's not my world or my experience. I've been offered this, actually, not really forced on you, but it's sort of been coerced. You've been coerced like other things that have happened in the last few years. And you can unravel it and allow your true nature to come back again. And I don't think it's much more than that we're just opening up as a collective. And I do believe everybody at some, they're at some point on that sort of timeline around, opening up and being more of what they actually are. And that's all that's happening. And then those wonderful things of guidance, I know Gary experiences that a lot as well. Me, I feel sort of slightly less so on that, but all of these different things are arising at different times. And you realize that life is not as limited as what the choices are presented to you about. This is your life, and you can have a career, you can do this, you can do that. And I think despite the fact that you've been through, I mean, it's an incredible journey, and we've all had our ups and downs, but that really, truly incredible. To start to see the other side of that is just, I mean, again, for want of a better phrase, is a real blessing, actually.
No, I agree on the blessing side of things. I really do. I think that at some point in a soul contract, we chose this journey, and we probably chose journeys depending on what we thought where we could get to in our soul evolution. But you touched on there something that I think is really big and really important, which is like, it's almost like we're finding our authentic selves. It's like we're shedding the layers of programming. But when we look at what we know about the frequency and the pyramid of, it goes up, doesn't it, from fear and low vibration, love, and authenticity right at the top of the pyramid. Now, if this global ascension, this evolution of society's consciousness is based around the highest vibration, then I would say all any of us need to do is to just re-find our authentic selves, the soul that came into this earth, strip ourselves of the programming so that when we make decisions, we're making them from our authentic self and we're showing up authentically, not people pleasing, not saying things that you don't agree with just to fit in, all of those kind of things. I think that when we all get there, we all ascend. Yeah, I did have another point, but my brain is so slow this morning. I don't know what's wrong.
Don't worry, it's not meant to come from brain. and a lot of the energy that I'm receiving from you, and I guess for Gary alone to jump in as well, is just that energy of authenticity, and it's sort of irrelevant what we sit here and say. I do really think it's important that certainly the Quantum Bridge and having guests like yourself, that we offer a type of grounding that is not found anywhere else at the moment, and it will be by many other, and we're tiny, so people might not have found us, and they might find other people who are doing something similar. But I think that this is really still right at the vanguard of what's happening in this movement and ascension.
I agree. I think you're at the beginning of something that's going to get very big, and I think what you're doing right now will become absolutely massive in the next 2 years. You're just early adopters, so to speak, and it's always a little bit lonely when you're the first one somewhere, isn't it? At the party, you just have to sit there and hold a beer, and probably we shouldn't be holding a beer, but do you know what I mean?
It's all good. I mean, it's this thing of sort of the lonely eagle flying high. It's that thing of if you are setting out to do something different, then it's inevitable that you're going to feel moments of being alone, but also that's where the magic happens.
Absolutely.
It's a spot I'm used to, so it's okay. When I was younger, I was always the guy in the corner of the club with a Coke by himself, I really don't want to be here, until I found the strength to just not go in the first place. So it's been quite a comfortable spot, for me, when in the workplace, and I remember there'd be like meetings, or I'd be like, who thinks this, or go into this corner if you think this, or go, and I think it's going to be me in that corner by myself, isn't it? I can see this coming. Everyone goes off. I'm like, okay, here we go again. But I've learned to love that little spot, because I think, well, I'd worry more if I was with the crowd, sort of pulling everyone, like, come on this way.
Your soul maybe knew early on that, hang on a minute, this isn't what it's all about here.
Yeah. But it's a lonely spot. Yeah, it is a lonely place. But I think that's where we was talking again before we come on, that because of that, you can recognize the shift now. That, I mean, somebody posted earlier about they were describing sort of somebody, I don't know, who just goes home and does whatever, and these were qualities, and I thought, well, this was what was called boring when I was young, So these kind of, and then it's kind of like, now it's if you don't drink, it was uncool, and now it's kind of like cool sort of thing to. There's just all this sort of. So I see this switching and shifting of opinions and consciousness, I suppose, and a lot of people diving deeper into themselves and what else is there out there, rather than just this sort of what do we call it, bread and circus type thing. I mean, are you seeing that as well in your sort of feed and life?
So this is why I love X, and one day I'm probably going to regret saying that, aren't I, when it turns out to be something bad. But what I love about it is the only place that I feel like I really connect with people like yourselves, and and there's a community of us, isn't there? You and I share very similar followers, I think, and there's a group of people that are exactly where we're at, and we can support each other in our journey. And there's one or two people in what I would call real life that are right there in the same sort of place on the path. So I don't feel alone anymore, but the numbers are small. But I think the number one thing that pushes you from feeling fear and feeling into this more blissful state of being guided, I've started to look at every single thing that presents in my life that initially we go, oh my God, that's a massive problem, right? Whether that be financial or health or a bad interaction with somebody that goes a bit pear-shaped. If you I've started to ask myself two things, like either what is the lesson I need to learn here? If I haven't already learned the lesson, or what lesson have I already learned that I'm being tested for? And since I've been looking at it that way, literally almost everything that comes into your life, you can go, oh, right, yeah, so I learned this a few months back, and now it's just coming back to test, through another scenario, to test how I react to this. Because I imagine to access these timelines, it's to raise that frequency, whatever it is that's doing that for us or helping us on that journey needs to make sure that we've passed class, that we've learned. You're not going to go to the next level until you can prove that you're actually putting your money where your mouth is and you're practicing what you preach. I'll stop talking about that. I've had a massive example of that this week, actually, in my own 3D reality. So I won't go into it. It's to do with my dad, who's been quite sick. And he's been in and out of problems, and then we avoid chemical medicine completely. But he had a bleed on the brain on Friday. So he'd had a stroke a few weeks ago, which I talked to you guys about, and sadly had to postpone the podcast. But he had a bleed on the brain on Friday. But I actually believe that it may be with all the X codes that were coming through and the M-class flares, it was something to do with the crown chakra. But obviously the medical system doesn't understand that. So he gets this bleed on the brain, and he gets lured in. And I spoke to him on the phone last night, and he's going, oh, you know what? I might have these procedures that they're recommending. And I said, Dad, you're on the street every single day, every single week with all his friends. You're handing out the light paper. You're telling everybody, there's other ways, there's natural remedies. If you get cancer, there's this, there's that, the other. I said, you're preaching, but are you practicing? And maybe this is a test. And then he rung me just this morning, and I was really happy about it. And he says, I've made the decision. I'm going to go into oxygen therapy. I'm going to use alternative therapies. I'm discharging in a couple of days, and I'm not going through with it. So that's just an example where I think, we are tested. And I'm sorry, I went on a completely different trajectory.
No, it's great. It's great. Yeah.
Yeah. And we wish him well.
Yeah,
he'll be all right. He always is.
Yeah.
Is a fire.
As we come to the sort of wind-up section of the show now.
Just to come back quickly to that then, so Sophie, that area that you're touching on, this thing of perspective, and this thing of timelines. I just, again, a bit of revealing about my own experience, just because I think when I hear other people speak now on the Quantum Bridge, I realize that what we think are these very divergent lives in many ways are actually very, very similar. And that a lot of us who are moving into that certain resonance are just experiencing, they can show up slightly differently in your experience, but really they're actually very comparable things, whether that be to do with finances or just, I'm finding even more simplistic choices. I don't know, let's just say it's the example of throwing something in the trash just in the normal receptacle, or putting it in even if you don't believe that there's actually ultimately any different, but putting it in the recycling. Just these little tiny things that are showing up in our experience that actually might be, the segues into a completely different timeline and experience. So you've mentioned some things that are very broad, and obviously our heart goes out to both yourself and your father regarding that. And that's a big thing, right? That actually you might be able to reduce down to something, and it might become something that's, less all-encompassing, as you say, with taking those different pathways that we can now at least reflect on them and say, well, actually, this is being told to you, but it's only being presented to you. You might want to take a different choice, and you're more informed now. And all of those, when it comes to things like our own health, most of us over the last 4 or 5 years have become incredibly informed about, you know, what is at least out there. But I think it's even these little tiny changes that might, often with Dennis Buddock, who obviously we all like, right? And he's talking about timelines and those shifts happening every few minutes, or even, you know, potentially every few seconds, that those are occurring, and you're choosing a very different path by these little things. I just think it might be sort of worth ending on that thought that, you know, all these little things that we do, even these shows, they're not grand either. They might still be enough to make these massive differences down the line.
The one tiny illustration is, and I can't even admit to how I was because it makes me seem really bad, but for many years, if I was stood outside having a cigarette and there was already a pile of cigarettes on the floor, I would just chuck mine on the floor.
Yeah,
but the past couple of months, I found myself, without even consciously doing it, stubbing it out, putting it in my pocket till I get to a bin. And I don't know where that's come from, but it's just like you say, just that subtlest piece of behavior seems to do something, doesn't it?
Yeah. Brilliant. The ramifications of that just ultimately might be absolutely enormous. Those little decisions now, I just think it's an important thing to raise, because I think I get the sense it's where we're all headed, that we'll realize these little tweaks are going to make our experience so much grander. So
yeah, fantastic. Well, it's that time again where we have to say goodbye, but hopefully you'll join us again sometime. We'll expand on that conversation.
And just final note for me to say, please keep doing what you're doing. It resonates with me, and it resonates. I'm certain it's resonating with so many people. I love what you're doing. You're at the beginning, and it's going to be a massive adventure. And if I can help you guys in any way along your adventure, you just reach out, and I'd love to collaborate in any way or help you in any way I can. And thank you for having me on your show.
Thank you.
It's very, very kind. Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Bye now.